How should you set up a palette and which color should go where? Well, you're going to get about as many answers to that question as the number of artists that you ask. But today I'm going to show you how I do it. I have here the ShinHan. These are the premium PWC, so extra fine artist watercolors, and there's 32 of them. This was a gift. I also had received, as a gift from someone else, this Meeden porcelain palette, which happened to have 32 wells. So it seemed like these were made for each other. So I decided I was going to put these watercolors into this palette, and I'm going to show you how I decided what order these should go in. First, let's just talk about the ShinHan watercolors real quick. I will be covering these in more detail in the near future. So if that is something that you're interested in, please definitely make sure you leave me a comment and let me know. Now, the ShinHan watercolor, the PWC watercolor line, has 104 colors in their lineup. The set that I got has 32 of those colors. So we're going to take a quick look at what colors are in that 32 set, and how I decided what order they should go in. So for starters, let me just take the lid off of this. Here is my porcelain palette. This palette has 32 wells. 33 if you count this one. But what this spot actually is, you'll see here, this is your mixing space. The divider does not go all the way down. There's a lip by all the color wells. When I mix on this, if I need to clean this up so that I can, maybe I'm starting a new painting and I want this to be nice and fresh and clean for my mixing area, I could come in and spritz water all in here and get this nice and wet, or even just pour water in here, clean this off with a brush, and then I can tip this and all the water from both sides will flow down into this well and I can pour it out. So this is actually for cleaning your palette. So this space is not going to get filled. You could conceivably rinse all of this, let it pour into this well and let it dry over here and create your own gray from your palette mud, if you would. That, I guess, is an option if you're like, oh, but I don't want to throw that paint away. You could do that. The first thing I did when I opened up my paints is I took all the tubes out and I organized them by color and if they were warm or cool, so that my cool reds could lean into my cool blues, going into my warm blues, into my greens. Then I went through my earth colors here because as I came around with this set, it went with my cool reds into the warm, because there are oranges in this set. So into the orange, into the yellow, back to my earth tones. I will set up my colors differently based on the palette that I'm using, the colors that are in the set that I have. Sometimes I have a set that maybe doesn't have the oranges in it, and I might start with my yellows and go from my yellows into my reds, into my warm reds, and then into my warm blues, into my cool blues, to my greens, and then into my earth tones. Sometimes I do it that way. It really depends. I've started with red and gone reds, starting with my warm red. And then when I don't have oranges, start with my warm reds, go into my cool reds, go into my warm blues, to my cool blues, to my greens, and then to my yellows, and then into my earth tones. And I'll do it that way. So it really depends on the set of watercolors that I am getting ready to put into a palette. But the next step that I do is I look at my spaces and I start to organize my colors. Now with this particular set, it has opera in it, and opera, this is BR1. It is fugitive. Opera is very fugitive. It is a 1-star. It is not going to be permanent in any watercolor painting I do. This is something that I'm only going to use if I'm working in a sketchbook or on, say, a card. I don't use opera often. rarely if at all. So I'm going to put it up here in this furthest away from my mixing space corner. So I knew I wanted to have this pink, so cool red, starting to lean into my violets to be up here in the corner. And then as I looked at my blues, it worked out perfectly to where if I went across my last blue, peacock blue, which is a phthalo blue, could go right here in this corner, because the other blue in this set that is a cool blue is cerulean blue. But these are both PB15:3. So they're both phthalo blues. So I have one that will be the larger well and one that will be the smaller well. And the way that I'm going to determine which one will go where, I just put those backwards. My cerulean blue, peacock blue. This is the cerulean. This is the cerulean blue. This is the peacock blue. They are so very similar, but this one is just a little bit more intense. So I think I would probably end up using that one more often than this one. That'd probably be the one I would just grab. And this is really kind of like a backup. I don't know how much I'll use that, so it worked perfect to also have this furthest away from my mixing area. So knowing those were going to be on that corner, I just kind of went through and worked my warm blues into cool blues, into cool greens, to warm greens, earth tones, yellows, orange, back into my reds, and the circle goes round and round. So I put the layout the way I thought I wanted them. And then I put a piece of watercolor paper on top of here, and I swatched them. Now this was the way I thought the layout was going to go. But once I put these down and I looked at them, I decided, you know what? This green, I would really like a little closer to this green because they're really more similar. And then from this green, which is very yellow undertone, maybe that leans into my green gold. This is PY129. And then this more olive color, that could happen to be over here before we start to get into my brown earth tones. Now, when we came around this corner, my sepia is PR101 and PBK11. One thing that this set doesn't have is PBK11 on its own. I so wish it did because that's one of my favorites. In fact, if I enjoy these watercolors, one thing that I may do is see if I can't order PBK11 on its own because I actually use that color a lot. And then it might find a way to shift these and appear up here. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So I have my sepia, which is, again, the PR101 and PBK11. There are a lot of PR101s on their own in this set. But as you can see here, they are all very different hues. Are they all necessary? I don't know. That's really up to the artist's preference. But as I laid these out at first, by looking at the bands on the tubes, I thought this is the way I was going to want them. This was a mix. This was just PBR 25. Wait a minute. Yes, PBR 25. Okay, so this was just PBR 25. And then I had all the PR 101s together. But as I put them down, I really kind of didn't like the order that they were in. So as they come around my palette, I really thought that this one needed to go after this one. And then maybe I could start with my really reddish browns coming in after that, then starting to lean into the ones that are more like brownish yellow. And that would carry me into my yellows. So you see I made little marks for me. I've moved them around and I've set my tubes up. I've changed things and set them up the order that I want them to now go into my palette. As we come over here, the yellows get into the oranges, into the warm reds. These here, I need to switch. I put these three, I thought I was going to keep them together because these are all PR. This is PR 83. This one. And this is a PR83. And this says Crimson Lake, PR83. Light Fast is 2. PR83 is the original alizarin crimson. That is Fugitive. So that does say it's a 2-star. But then we have this one, which I've already moved, is Rose Madder. They say it's a 3-star. But when you look at the pigment information, it's PR83. PR83 has been Fugitive since the time of the old masters. PR83, it's going to disappear. It is definitely going to disappear over time. So I don't know how this has a 3-star rating. I don't trust it, but just knowing it's PR83, I was going to keep the two together and kind of up here in this cluster that's a little bit further, like how they are in comparison to the mixing area, because, you know, this well is here and they're kind of a little cut off. I was going to keep them up here, but my brain didn't like that. This is a bit warmer than this, so I moved them. I went ahead and swapped them. I'm going to know what the pigments are. I'm going to know that it's not necessarily one that I'm going to grab often, unless, of course, I'm painting in a sketchbook or creating cards. I will absolutely use it for either of those situations. So the colors are not lost on me or unappreciated being in the set. There are a variety of pigments that are 2-star in this set that, again, I might not use for paintings that I was going to sell my originals of. But as long as I'm aware of that, I have no problem having them in my collection. We will take a deeper dive into what all the actual colors are in the set and have a much better look at them as we dive deeper in upcoming videos. So again, if that is something that you are interested in seeing, please do hit that thumbs up and drop me a comment and let me know. But these here, there are a few in the set, like the Opera and this Vermilion Hue. They're only a Light Fast rating of 1. They have 1 star. This is a PO16. The color's beautiful. It's a beautiful orange. That would be this one. But it's only a 1 star. So how do you feel about that? Do you mind using paints that can be fugitive? I don't, as long as they are in like a sketchbook, something that's just for practice, or on a card that I am just going to, that I'm going to give to somebody, or in an artwork that I am going to scan and then sell prints of. Like some, I might create some artwork that I then scan and sell the prints of as prints or turn them into cards. So there are different ways I can use this. We will do a whole first impression of these paints when I get to paint with them. But for now, I was just going to lay out my palette. Once I have chosen the order, again, by testing my swatches, I have rearranged my tubes, and now all I will do is squeeze them into my palette. If this was a palette with half pans, like something like this, which is what I was actually originally going to put these paints in, I would put them in here, let them dry out before I decided to use that. However, we're definitely going to use this palette because I've had this for almost a year and I haven't put paints in it. And I was treating it so very precious, and I don't want to do that. I really want to use it. I love mixing on porcelain, and I think this is going to be a great use for these paints. 32 wells, 32 colors. I do think they were meant for each other. So that's how I decide how I'm going to lay out a palette and put my colors in. So the next thing to do is just squeeze these in, remake a swatch, and my palette is done and ready to go. Another thing about choosing this palette, I am not going to put, as I knock all my colors down, I am not going to put a lot of the paint into the pans because I am testing these to see what I think of them. If I don't like these watercolors, This is an expensive palette, and this is a great palette. Your larger brushes can get into these wells so nicely. I'm not going to want to commit permanently a palette to paint I may or may not want to use. So you're going to see me just put a tiny amount of each of these colors in here to start with. Now, if I really enjoy them, there are colors in here that I know I'm probably not going to want to keep on a palette, which means I would just use up that color and then replace it with one from the range. Again, there's 104 colors. I only have 32. So there are plenty for me to replace them with in the line. And that's what I would do. So to start with, I'm not going to go crazy and fill these up, like just fill a well. We're just going to put a little bit in. So I'm going to speed this up as I do that. And then I will re-swatch my colors so that I have my swatch sheet to match my palette. And you'll see exactly how it ended up being laid out. And I hope this is helpful. If it is, definitely hit that like button. Now that I have my colors all set in my palette, I'm going to take my box and I'm going to put them away in the same order so that when it comes time to refill my colors, I can easily find them. So I'm just going to set these all right back in here. And we'll talk about this. I decided I wanted my blues up here because I tend to use a lot of blue in my palettes. I go through blues quickly. So this palette, the larger wells, that's where I decided I wanted my blues to be. And it worked out perfectly with this set of colors that it let me put those two colors. They just kind of fell in the order correctly to where they would be in these wells that I knew I wasn't going to be using them too much. And you see how much further away they are from my mixing space. So I'm going to go ahead and get these all back in here and we'll talk about what order I settled on. So there we go. It looks like a very nice color wheel. Wherever you like to start, that's absolutely just a matter of personal preference. There is no right or wrong way to fill a palette. Sorry if that's not what people were looking for, but there just isn't. It all depends on the artist and how you prefer to paint and what order you like to have them in for when you reach for something. I do like my colors to go in a range from the cools to the warms. See here, we got our blues from our warm to our cool. Again, with our green, from our cool greens to our warmer greens. Here's the earth tones. And then we have the cool yellows into the warm yellows. And again, back to orange and warm reds. So where they start as far as what corner or what row, that's all up to you. Sometimes if I was doing this in a palette, I might start right here and work my way through my colors like this and end with my earth tones. I might end up doing that, but they would be reversed. You see where this earth tone starts? It's going to be closer to these warm greens. So these would be like this, and that would come back around, usually ending in black after my sepia or umber. That tends to be how I go a lot of times, where I start with my yellows and go that way. If I was starting with warm reds because I had no orange, sometimes I don't put orange on my palette because I'll just mix an orange. So I would start with my warm red, work through just like this, but as I get to my green yellows, I will start with my cool yellows. They would come up here, and then that would go through to my warm yellow, and then my yellow ochre would come next, and I would work my way into my earth tones and end with black if I have black on that palette. So that is another way that I do it. How do you like to arrange your colors? Let me know in the comments below. Do you like to start with yellows? Do you start with red? Are you a Roy G. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple kind of setup on your palette? Do you mix your earth tones in where they might fall with these others and not keep them separate? I don't know. Again, it's all a matter of preference. There is no right or wrong. However you like to do it is perfectly fine. But I hope that that helps. And I'm going to swatch these out and just show you how they look in swatches before we go. And again, I'm not going to go into all of the pigments and the colors. This was just talking about setting up a palette. So if you're interested in the specific pigments and colors that come in this set and want to know more about this whole swatch card, let me know in the comments below and we will dive deeper into the ShinHan PWC 32 color set in the near future. Let's swatch these colors. For swatching today, as usual, I'm just going to use my Be Inspired watercolor paper. I get this at Walmart. The price for 2 50 sheet pads of this, you can't beat it. I definitely will have this linked in the description below. This is my go-to as far as cellulose paper, because the value is just, it's wonderful. And I love the texture, and I like the way my watercolors tend to perform on this paper. If you're looking for an inexpensive cellulose paper that you can practice on, this is a definite recommend. And you can see, so let's see if it'll let the texture show up. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to show the texture. No. There you go. You can see it a little bit there above my fingers. I like the texture. It's not, it doesn't have straight lines. It's a little bit more organic. So just my personal preference. All right, let's just quickly, I'm going to speed this along as I do this because again, I'm not going over all of the pigment information and what every color name is. It's just to see those pretty colors. And then we can take a look at where I started, where I landed, and why I do it this way. Well, that definitely left a mark. Don't throw your paintbrush. Don't throw your paintbrush. It's going to be fine. I'm not going to worry about it. And just like that, it almost never happened. All right, so there we go. And if you notice, I was kind of a little hung up when I got right here. I knocked my browns down a couple times. I might not have put them back up in the same order. I think I would have put this one over here and then had this one, and this one. But, you know, I could, if I wanted to, take this out and swap them, move this down, and put that over there. But no, I'm just going to live with it for now. I think when it comes down to using these up and replacing them, maybe I'll switch the order, but for now, you know what? It's fine. These things happen. If this was a palette where I could just take the pans out, I would be able to just take this out and swap them, and all I'd have to do is redo my swatch card. But when it's in a porcelain palette, things are kind of where you put them is where they're staying. So that's why I like doing this type of method. And when I lay this out here and I look at how these were before, this one is now here, which is where I said I wanted to move it to. This one is here, which is what I said. This one is here. And this one is now down here. I just painted it darker. So, you know, perhaps still fine. Because look at how that color looked in my first swatch versus how dark I made it in my second. So I think it's still fine. I don't think I'm going to have a problem living with that. And I like the order. Now we look at how this side rearranged. The new order, I'm liking that transition much, much better. So this one's a tricky one because this is actually PY 129. This is green gold. A lot of times I'll have it with my greens. Sometimes I'll have it right here with my yellows as we transition from like yellow ochre into yellow, but into like the cool yellows. But sometimes I put it with greens. It really depends on my mood, I think, when I'm setting up the palette. But that's where it landed this time. And that's fine because I was keeping it's green gold. I don't even know if that's what they call the color in ShinHan, because, you know, they can name them anything they want to. And they call it, this one, yeah, greenish yellow is what they call it. Greenish yellow. And it is PY 129. So it is a yellow pigment, but, and yes, it's a greenish yellow. A lot of times that will fall right here on my palette. So it's just a matter of preference. If you use PY 129, do you put it with your greens or do you put it over with your yellows? Again, it's just a matter of personal preference. There is no right or wrong answer. And then you can see here how my reds switched up, and I definitely like this transition a little bit better with these two being swapped in the line. Let's just talk about my blues for a second. Because when I did my blues, going from my warm blues to my cooler blues, this is cobalt blue. This is ultramarine blue. This is an indigo, and their indigo is different. It is a single pigment indigo. Again, I can get into all of these if you want a deeper dive on this ShinHan set. But as I went through, like, this maybe would be better moved down here. This, I wasn't really sure where I kind of wanted it, but how I made my decision was that these two granulate. These two are also 3-star. These are 2 stars. And they're cooler blues, but they also don't granulate. These granulators, I kind of decided I was going to keep them together. They are also my 2 3-star blues. This is probably what I'm going to go to the most, either for a warmer or a cooler blue. So I decided to put them together, whereas normally maybe this looks a little different through here. But for this palette, this works for me. Another thing that I thought was really great, because if you are familiar with the channel, you know that one of my favorite mixes for a gray, because you notice we don't have a neutral tint on here. We have indigo. This indigo is very dark. It looks similar to a Payne's gray. It is a single pigment color, but it's still only a 2-star pigment, according to ShinHan. I like to mix my ultramarine blue with my burnt sienna. And one of the things I was like, how am I going to remember as I'm learning my palette, aside from having this big swatch sheet sitting up on my desk for me to look at? One of the ways is this center line points right to my burnt sienna. And that was part of why I wanted this to kind of fall right here. So I know I can grab my ultramarine blue, boom, there's my burnt sienna, mix them up. I have a beautiful neutral. And that's how that landed there on my palette. So it was just one of those little shortcuts to kind of help me go quickly in my mixing. What do you think of setting up a palette this way? Does this work for you? Does this help? I hope it was helpful. If it was, please do hit that like button. And if you would like to join us for live paintings where you can paint along, most Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Occasionally we cover other things, but a lot of time we're just sitting here painting together. Click that subscribe button and you can be notified whenever new videos or live streams come out, and it will allow you to also chat with me live during the streams. Was this helpful? Drop me a comment. Should this be with greens or should it be with yellows? Where do you usually start your palette? Do you start with reds? Do you start with yellows? Maybe you start with blues. I don't know. Again, there is no right or wrong, and I am sorry if you came here looking for the absolute answer. All I can do is share with you my way and hope that if that makes sense to you, it is helpful and will help you setting up your future palettes. So until next time, my friends, keep creating, and I will see you in a video real soon. Bye, guys.